Li-Cain. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well despite what's going on all around us, I suppose.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm really thankful you're here to talk about this topic today. We're going to talk about financial grief and other negative emotions and how to deal with that in the world right now today. And Sarah here is our guest, and Sarah is the host of Beyond the Dollar podcast. She is a personal finance writer who's been in major publications all over the place. So, Sarah, first of all, tell me a little bit about your journey to the United States and how you felt after you arrived.
Yeah, so good question. So I moved to the US about 3-ish years ago. And so if you think about it, I moved from China. So I was originally from Canada, lived in China for about 8-ish years, and then moved to the US. And so that is a major change in itself. Two other major changes that happened was I transitioned from teaching to becoming a full-time finance writer, and I'm also a first-time mom. So when we moved to the US, I actually moved to a very small town in the US. So I didn't know anybody. I was the primary caretaker of my son, so I had to figure out childcare. I decided to forego daycare for a little while just to figure out things. I was also getting used to living in a new country. I was getting used to figuring out what it means to be a full-time self-employed person. And so what ended up happening was I had all these major transitions and I had nobody to really talk about it with. I did not really see anybody in person except for my husband, my son, and eventually when I did bring my son to daycare, maybe that person once or twice a week. And then the only other people I really would talk to were ones on Skype or on the phone. And so I was going through a lot of these emotions. Like, I'm sure people who have young children know that you don't get a lot of sleep. A lot of things are happening with infants, and again, if as a first time parent, I didn't really know what was going on. As someone who was going through self employment on her own, not talking to anybody about it, I just felt really isolated and alone and angry and sad and all of those emotions. And I didn't really know how to express them or find some kind of healthy way to process them initially. And so whenever these current events really started happening, I started thinking back to that time because I think what a lot of people are feeling are very similar to that in terms of things are very new. It feels very uncharted. They're not really sure how to react to it or how to talk about it in a way that's sensitive and not necessarily triggering for other people. And so that's really what I was going through.
So, what was the effect on your financial situation as you were feeling all of these difficult things like the isolation and the anger and sadness?
So, in terms of my budget, luckily we had savings set aside. So, it wasn't one of those where I was really scrambling for money per se. But what it was more about, it was more the emotional reaction to money because I felt like I was initially making a lot less than what I was at my day job when I first transitioned. And so a lot of it was tying my income to my self-worth. Like, oh, I only made $1,000 this month. This means I'm like a really terrible writer or nobody likes me. And so it was really grappling with those emotions in terms of like really untying my financial situation to who I was a person. Something else that I really had to grapple with was emotional spending. I really was emotionally spending a lot. I think I was buying extra clothes for my son and he didn't need it. I bought all these books that he didn't really need. Sort of overcome my in some ways like a guilt that I felt like I wasn't a good enough mom because I wasn't providing financially for my family. So it was a lot of spending on unnecessary things, trying to be okay with the fact that yes, my financial situation temporarily isn't what I would like it to be, and that's okay.
So, and I think that applies to what people might be feeling right now when they're home in isolation. There's financial grief. I mean, grief is such a strong emotion. What does that look like right now?
So grief, like you said, it's a lot of emotion. So you can go from guilt, anxiety, loneliness, shock, disbelief. Maybe you got laid off, for example, and you thought it was a pretty secure job. So perhaps you're just really coming to terms with like what is happening. And so a lot of people, maybe they don't feel like they're feeling anything, but it's probably because they're just confused or in disbelief, or almost, I guess you'd say in some ways like in denial about what is going on, especially if you're just, turned off social media, you don't really read the news, like you can kind of really kind of close yourself off in that. Something that I noticed that I've been doing, again, because I am an emotional spender, is that I feel so upset and bad at all the small businesses around me that are either closing or struggling for business, that I had been just trying to buy things here and there from all of these businesses. And so I can't tell you how much I spent, but I'm sure I went over budget quite a few times the last couple of weeks. And that can really harm my financial situation if I don't curb that, right? So, yes, I want to help other people, but that can come to the detriment of my financial situation as well, right? Some people can maybe, again, overcompensate. They're buying all this stuff on Amazon Prime, or they're panic buying at the groceries because they're really scared that maybe they won't have access to food for a couple weeks if they're isolated. Like all of these things where if you are emotionally reacting to your financial situation is really all forms of grief.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talked about kind of the pressure we have right now to buy. I mean, we don't want our local businesses to go out of business. We want to support those things in our community that we can, and there's a lot of we feel the responsibility to do that in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of pressure from those businesses and the media, and just our own values as well, to kind of put the needs of the community above perhaps our own financial situation. And that might extend to where there's a lot of talk about, well, what should you do with the stimulus money that you get, assuming you qualify for it? And there's a lot of pressure to put that back into the economy. And do we what do we do? Do we go along with that? Do we do what's best, what we think is best, or what people are saying is best for the economy? Or do we look at our own financial situation and say, well, that could really help me, boost my savings or pay off some debt? How do you deal with those emotions and that decision?
Yeah, and it's natural to feel overwhelmed. I think no matter what you're going through right now, even if you have, let's say, a stable job and it's looking okay for the foreseeable future, or you're filing for unemployment, or any other form, like it's very natural to feel overwhelmed, and it's very natural to kind of want to look to experts per se to like tell you exactly what to do, just because your mental bandwidth was really maxed out, right? Let's say I'm just overwhelmed, I don't know what to do, like you tell me what to do. And it's really easy to default to that. And what I would suggest is, again, not easy, but to feel everything that you're feeling without judgment. I think when I started feeling guilty about all these businesses kind of closing and wanting to spend all this money, I I was trying to judge like how I was spending money. I'm like, oh, I don't usually go to this store. Like, why am I doing this? Like, and all of that. But I would just sit down and I would go, okay, let me name what I'm feeling. Let me feel what I'm feeling. And then once you can process, like at least initially what's going on, then it makes it easier to go to your bank account or look at your current financial situation, and then put a little bit of logic to it, right? It's great to want to spend all of that money and put it back into local businesses. But let's say you don't have an emergency fund, or let's say you're not currently employed. That money could probably be better putting it towards your own needs, and that's okay. I think everybody's personal finance situation is different. And so it's really important to look at what you need and be okay with what you're going to do with your money.
Yeah, and just another one of these strong emotions, I think, is the survivor's guilt. I mean, thankfully, a lot of people who are listening to this are going to be safe and healthy at home right now, and every person out there probably knows someone, or knows someone who knows someone who isn't healthy, who is struggling or maybe even did not make it through this pandemic right now. So there's survivor's guilt here for those people who are, maintaining their jobs and doing okay, or even just alive. How do you deal with some of that, and how do you prevent it from hurting your financial situation?
Yeah. And I'll go back to my example of spending all this money in local businesses. Like,
Mhm.
again, I'm very thankful that even if I went over budget a little bit, that wasn't a detriment to my finances. But for some people, it can be. Maybe they're putting it on their credit cards or, again, depleting their emergency fund or whatever it is. And so I think there are ways to help without spending money. So something you can do really simple is if you see an Instagram post of someone advertising their farmers market, let's say, for example, or I know a local business here that is opening up their farm every weekend to sell to consumers. And so you could share those posts. You can share resources. You can even donate your time. So if you're, let's say you're a financial professional or you're marketing whiz and you want to help some local businesses kind of figure out ways to keep their business afloat, you can donate your time. Also, on that same vein, it's okay to take care of your needs as well. I know that I am really into helping other people, sometimes almost at the detriment of my own energy. And so I find myself really, really drained. And so, you know, it's like I know there's like I think a lot of memes going on. Like staying at home is actually doing the world a service. And by you staying home, that's okay as well. By you sharing resources for other people, that's okay as well. I think that we feel bad, and I'm generalizing here, like a lot of us feel bad that we can't do more. But I think as humans, as long as we are empathetic to what's going on around us, and any little small action we do is actually really good.
What kind of financial routines can we set up that would help us with our emotional health through this?
Okay. So if you know you're an emotional spender, something really simple is to remove your credit card information from your favorite shopping sites. You can block again your favorite shopping websites. I think there's a bunch of like Google Chrome extensions that you can block those websites if you just feel like I'm gonna shop because I'm emotional. Set alerts for your credit cards and your bank accounts so that you can see if there's any fraudulent transactions or your bank account balances are going low. I have done something where I actually put my debit card away from my savings account, so I'm not tempted to like dig into my emergency fund if I feel like, oh, there's this like really great thing I need to do right now, even though it's not necessary. So it's really just keeping an eye on your finances and being really aware of your behaviors around what you're doing in terms of spending to really take care of your finances right now.
Is there anything else that we can do to, just any kind of healthy ways to process all of these emotions that don't involve money?
Yeah. So I think this is stuff you can do regardless of what's going on in the world is journal, giving yourself a timeout. So that could look like meditating, that could be like going for a walk, that could be watching a comedy on Netflix. So sometimes I think when we get very emotional, we get really kind of caught up in that emotion, especially like negative ones. Like we kind of create these stories in our head. And so giving yourself a barrier between that and the negative emotion, even for like a minute, can be really, really helpful. It can give you some perspective in terms of what your situation is like.
Okay, great. So, is there anything else, any other suggestions or resources that you can provide that would help people um, gain some awareness of their emotions and maybe take some control or just recognize what they're going through?
Yeah. So I suggest, in terms of like free resources, there's a lot of certified financial planners and accredited financial counselors who are providing free services at this time. So if you find that you have been financially affected, I think it's like the XYPN network has a list think if you just search coronavirus, you should be able to get a list of um, certified financial planners. And I think the accredited financial counselor website also has a list of volunteers that are here to help. So if you do feel like you need some specific guidance, that is a great resource. And I think even talking to your friends and family about what you're feeling is really helpful. I think when I think back to 3 years ago and I was going through, the big move and self-employment and parenting, what I found really helped was actually reaching out to other freelance writers. And once I realized that I really wasn't alone in feeling the things that I was feeling or going through what I was going through, it made me feel a lot better and a lot more confident to tackle some of the challenges ahead. So if you are feeling survivor's guilt, see who you can reach out to. And you can even go on Twitter and maybe find some like posts from people who are feeling the same way. And even just having someone acknowledge what you're feeling is going to be like really, really helpful in terms of processing it and helping you move forward with whatever it is that you need to be moving forward with.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you can look and see perhaps there's already a group that gets together online that allows people to kind of have this discussion together. And if there isn't, you can make one. Why not take this chance to lead a group that's going to help you and it's going to help other people as well? How about protecting finances during this time so that you can reduce your stress?
So protecting your finances in terms of like your bank accounts and things like that.
Yeah, just making sure that you're making good decisions, not affected by the emotions, and you're making the right decisions that are going to set you up for success later.
Right. So I think it's really important if you have a budget, is just to review it right now. And so something I like to do is, let's say you're in a pretty good financial situation right now. You just never know. So I create what I would call like a bare bones temporary budget, like cut everything except for like food, shelter, transportation, if you need to, let's say go to an essential job, like what is the absolute bare minimum. And then another one where it's a bare minimum plus kind of like maybe Netflix and a little entertainment, and then your quote unquote regular budget. So that way you're prepared for the worst case scenario before you are. So it helps you emotionally prepare so that if something does happen, you have something in place to help you out. Um, Maybe it could even be simple as making a list of ways to make money right now, or a list of job search websites that that have companies that are hiring right now. So you may not need them, but it is there just in case, and it could help you sleep better at night.
Yeah, I think that's great. So, yeah, is there anything else you want to add? Any messages that you want to make sure people, have so that they can survive what they're going through right now?
I just really want to emphasize that whatever you're feeling and whatever actions that you're taking, it's okay. Like if you are doing something that you feel like is in your best interest, and that you are safe, and that it is, you've thought it through and you've decided that like this, it's a safest, most economically viable thing that you can do, that's okay. It may look different to somebody else's, but you know what's best for you and your family.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. Why don't you just let everybody know where they can find you if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, sure. So I'm over at beyondthedollar.co, or you can find me on Instagram at beyondthedollar.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here. This was great. And you'll be able to catch this on a podcast as well coming soon. We'll be back next week for another webinar. And thanks for joining us today.